Hello and welcome to Matner's Movie Musings. This is my first entry in my Take Two series, in which I will be revisiting some old movies from my childhood, some that I saw in my childhood, some that I've seen over the years, some that I um, haven't have only seen once, some that I've seen thousands of times. Basically, what I've done is I've uh, in the last month or so rewatched these movies, and now I'm going to discuss them with you. I decided to start all the way back in 1981, 40 years ago, which is a significant year for me, being the year that I was born. So it seemed as good a year as any to go back. So um, in this, what is essentially Act One, what I'm calling Act One of 1981, we'll be discussing seven of the movies that came out that year. I'm doing them in kind of chronological order of when they were released. So these are um, starting with movies released first, January, February, on throughout the year, and and so and each episode will contain about 6 to 8 different movies that I've seen, depending on the year. I've kind of split them up. 1981 didn't have as many movies, being as I was younger. Obviously as I got older, more movies became significant. But I'm not just doing this for movies that are significant to me. Some movies are significant just in history of cinema, or just popular movies, and or both. So, without further ado, the seven movies that we will be discussing in this episode are Scanners, Thief, Excalibur, The Howling, History of the World Part 1, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and Superman 2. So we do have quite a variety and interesting, most of them from prominent directors. Anyways, let's get started here with Scanners. Um, Scanners is, of course, best known for its scene of a character's head exploding. And so it's no surprise then that that was what drew my interest as a child. And the single image that has remained in my mind, all these years, was that head, that image that we all, I'm sure, carry with us. Everyone that's seen the movie. Having revisited it recently, however, I was pleasantly surprised to discover a rather smart, subtle, paranoid thriller. It certainly has a highly intriguing, fantastical premise. Set in the near future, and where some humans have evolved into highly intelligent beings with powerful psychic abilities, known as scanners. And the problem is that without constant effort, their powers can get out of control. The one, Cameron, is one such scanner, and he is recruited by a kindly old scientist to help track down and eventually overpower the sadistic leader of a dangerous army of scanners who are bent on world domination. The plot, as you can probably tell, is rather routine, but the scanners are a clever creation, and the film does a nice job of establishing the reality of their existence, while also delivering a thrilling battle of good versus evil. This is easily one of director David Cronenberg's most accessible and straightforward thrillers. Scanners is also one of his most comprehensive. I mean, it practically originated what became the standard 80s sci-fi action picture. Essentially, it's just a standard chase picture with sci-fi trimmings. In this sense, it's quite similar to the fellow 80s sci-fi classic The Terminator. Now, while, as I mentioned, Cronenberg's script is certainly full of fresh, intriguing ideas, it's actually his slick direction and attention to detail that make the film so fresh and keep the audience engaged. Cronenberg is, after all, the master of visual manipulation. And after such trashy, though slickly produced horror films as Rabid and The Brood, this is the film where he really started to find his visual voice. With great assistance from Gary Zeller's special effects, it's also one of his most popular and certainly most memorable films. Um, what I liked about it most was just the fact that he, as I said, took what is essentially a standard chase picture and really brought some great visual. Um, he really brought to life this great visual world, as well as these interesting characters. Yeah, this film is still, to me, a lot of fun. It's still entertaining, and it still holds up quite well. There still hasn't been anything like it inspired, you know, this kind of genre, and it still, in some senses, leads the pack. So, moving on now to Thief, which is one of my favorite movies of 1981, by one of my favorite, who I think is one of the most interesting directors, Michael Mann. Michael Mann's Thief is an intriguing film. I don't just mean its story, but the film itself. It's a powerful genre film, yet it doesn't fit easily into any particular genre. It probably fits easiest into the action category, but it's not really an action movie in the traditional sense. It also contains plenty of drama and romance, but wouldn't be easily categorized as either of those either. So if I had to categorize it, the best way to define Thief is a character study / action noir, I guess. The title may mislead you to think that this is just another generic actioner about a thief, but while the title does aptly describe the film, this film isn't what you would expect. The film opens like a traditional action film, introducing the main character as he is pulling off his latest job. This also works to show us how skilled he is. His name is Frank. He's played by James Caan, and he is indeed a great thief. But what makes the film so great is that he is more than that. After the job, we then get a revealing glimpse into his personal life. He is in love with a waitress named Jessie, played by Tuesday Weld, and we see him confess his deep love for her in a scene that reveals to us as well as her Frank's real character. He is a decent man whose morals may be a bit mixed up, but really just wants to settle down and have a family. There's a really nice scene in which the two try to adopt that most films of this kind wouldn't even bother with, but it adds even more complexity to the character. Anyway, the film's plot really begins about halfway through when Frank gets mixed up with a gangster named Leo, played wonderfully by the great stage actor Robert Prosky. This was actually his first film, which is amazing because his performance is so intense and so scary, and just a great actor. We'll definitely be discussing him over these episodes as he's in a lot of movies. You may not know him by name, but he is in some movies I'm sure you've seen, including John Carpenter's Christine and Last Action Hero. So, moving on, Frank gets mixed up with Leo, who convinced him to pull off one last big job, which is par for the course for this kind of film. But of course, things don't quite work out as simply as he's planned, as Leo, as well as the police, decide they want him out of the picture. Now, I know that last bit does sound pretty familiar, and in times the film does feel that way, but it still works because the film has spent so much time developing this character, his profession, and the world he inhabits. Even the familiar elements have a strong impact on us. The first two acts are so great that even though the third act slips a bit, it's hard to fault it because we already feel so strongly for this character. This was Michael Mann's first feature film, but you can't tell from the finished product. I mean, this film was made with such confidence. The style, the pacing, and the camera work are all top notch. I mean, it's so refreshing to find a film that has such faith in its characters and its subject that the plot is almost an afterthought. I mean, yet this film's plot is exciting and interesting as well. So it's almost a conundrum. I mean, this film is just fantastic. Thief is the rare film that will please action fans as well as prestigious film buffs, and it's a masterpiece in whichever genre that you decide to place it in. I highly recommend it. Great film. All right, and again, watching it recently, the film still holds up immensely. Yeah, I mean, it's very 80s in its style, and it's very reminiscent of Michael Mann's popular television series that he was involved with, Miami Vice. But unlike that film, it's not artificial. It's there's a lot. Although that show is a lot deeper than people give it credit for, but still, the Thief is way beyond that. It's a great, serious film, and I highly recommend it. On to Excalibur, which great movie. Which, by the way, I have forgotten to say that Scanners I award 4 out of 5 stars to, and Thief 5 out of 5. So moving on to Excalibur, which I also give 5 out of 5 stars to. Excalibur is a grittier, bloodier, and all around more barbaric rendering of the legend of King Arthur than the traditional romantic tellings we're used to. Especially compared to the musical adaptation Camelot, or the Disney version, Sword in the Stone. I mean, compared to those, this feels almost blasphemous. I mean, it's dark and bloody and sloppy almost, as the times were. Yet once we get acclimated to it, it feels downright genuine. I mean, this, as I said, I mean, this seems like this is probably how it really was. I mean, other than the magical aspects, this seems like a rather authentic vision of Camelot. I mean, the characters, their surroundings, and the events all seem to exist within a time and place that only existed long ago. This film is truly epic in scope, covering all of the most famous legends surrounding the character of Arthur. It begins with the story of his birth, leading up to his extraction of Excalibur from the stone as a young man. Then it transitions into his ascent to king and his marriage to Guinevere, which is, of course, put to the test by her affair with his most trusted knight, Lancelot. After which his kingdom is lost to his mortal enemy and half-sister Morgana, played wonderfully by the incomparable Helen Mirren as Morgana. She's who plays a fierce witch whose powers are matched only by Merlin, who taught her all she knows. Arthur's only hope for salvation or redemption is the attainment of the Holy Grail. Many movies have been made about any one of these subjects, and it seems overly ambitious to cover so much in one film, even if it does run nearly 2.5 hours. While Excalibur is absolutely ambitious in its scope and plotting, it's also rather grounded in its storytelling. I mean, Arthur may be the hero of the film, but the real focus is Merlin, who is a connecting fiber throughout the film, a master of ceremonies, if you will. His character is more of the protagonist in the sense that he is always present and more in control and involved in everything going on than anybody else. He's also, as played by Knuckle Williamson, the most interesting and engaging. I mean, it's a wonderful performance. If you've seen the film, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, it's worth seeing just for him. I mean, it's a delightful, delicious performance, and easily worth seeing the film for. But still, this is Arthur's story, and Excalibur is the best version ever to reach the screen. I mean, watching it again the other day, I couldn't help but compare it to the grittier, so-called real rendering of the character in both 2004's King Arthur and Guy Ritchie's more recent King Arthur: Legend of the Sword. And I was struck by two things. One, if you take away the mythical elements, all you're left with is just another sword and sandals actioner. Which both those films more than proved. And two, by taking out the fantasy, those films feel very much like modern action pictures playing dress up. Excalibur, on the other hand, completely transports us to another world and another time. When men were barbaric, women were prizes to be won, people believed in magic, and a hero's destiny was made with the brandishing of a sword. And during my most recent viewing, it awoke within the cynical adult the inner child who still believes in magic and longs to be swept away to a land of fantasy. I highly recommend this film. Once again, holds up perfectly. Again, special effects aside, it could have been made today. Um, oh, actually, it couldn't have, because, as I said, the kind of movies that they're making of this story today are not nowhere on this level. This is only the kind of movie they could have made back before Hollywood decided to take out story and only go for special effects and computer generated graphics. But I digress. Excalibur, 5 stars. If you haven't seen it, definitely should check it out. Moving on to The Howling, which is so far probably the most popular and well-known film we've come to. I'm sure most of you have seen it, or at the very least heard of it. And as I said, I award The Howling 4 out of 5 stars. And I also should say that The Howling is rated R, as have all the films that I've discussed so far. But anyway, back to The Howling. 1981 marked the return of the good old-fashioned monster movie. Over the previous decade, in the 70s, horror films had replaced monsters with more realistic horror elements, such as the psychological existence of the devil, in such films as The Exorcist and Rosemary's Baby, and the much more flesh and blood existence of the Mad Slasher in Halloween and Friday the 13th. Maybe that's what makes The Howling so much fun. I mean, it returns the horror genre to its purest, fun, sometimes silly origins. I especially enjoyed it as a loving homage to the universal horror classics of the 30s and 40s, like Frankenstein and The Wolfman, and in lesser sense, Dracula. But it has the same spirit as all of those films. What's interesting is that it starts out as a gritty modern horror film before suddenly, unexpectedly switching gears into the goofy yet scary monster movie it really wants to be. This allows the film to succeed for 2 reasons. One, it lets us know right away that this isn't going to be your ordinary werewolf movie. And 2, it eases the modern audience into the fantastic world of horror movie monsters. So anybody who isn't familiar with the Frankensteins and the Wolfmans and the Creature from the Black Lagoon, and who are used to the slasher movies. And it really does a good job of juxtapositioning the old-fashioned monster movie into the slasher horror genre. It's a melding of the two, if you will. The Howling is essentially a slasher movie with a werewolf as the killer. The film opens in the city with a grisly serial killer stalking a beautiful young reporter, played by Dee Wallace. And after a confrontation with the killer ends with gunfire, she's understandably traumatized. And at the recommendation of a renowned therapist, she heads off with her boyfriend to a country retreat. However, something isn't quite right, as unbeknownst to her, the killer is still on her trail, and the therapy group she has joined are all members of a werewolf tribe. Director Joe Dante, who previously made the playful Jaws homage Piranha, and went on to make more kid-friendly fantasies with Gremlins and Explorers, has a lot of fun playing with his audience expectations. Like I said, for the first 30 minutes, an unsuspecting viewer wouldn't even know they were watching a horror movie, let alone one involving werewolves. And then once the horror begins, he peppers in some inspired comedic moments in order to ease the tension before going in for the kill. Personally, I don't find werewolves all that interesting, especially compared to vampires or Frankenstein's monster or Freddy Krueger, all of whom have a much more interesting lore and engaging personalities. But I have to say that thanks mostly to George's special effects, The Howling contains some of the most stunning and horrifying werewolf material ever put on film. I mean, it certainly made an impact on me watching it at an early age, and even watching it again recently, I was still impressed with the effects and thoroughly entertained by the film itself. Speaking of special effects, so much credit goes to Rick Baker, who won a much deserved Oscar for An American Werewolf in London, which came out later the same year. But this film not only got there first, but in my opinion has the superior werewolf footage and used to much better effect. So while I like both films, and I do think that it's hard to say which one is the superior film. And even so, I would say that American Werewolf in London does showcase its effects better. I would still say that this film is superior, as well as using it for. It's much more creepier and intense here. But moving on to changing gears completely. we've come to a comedy. Mel Brooks's History of the World Part 1. This is probably one of his least popular or least known works. Certainly not compared to Young Frankenstein and The Producers and definitely Blazing Saddles. But anyways, History of the World Part 1 is rated R, and I award it 4 out of 5 stars. As I was saying, History of the World Part 1 is probably Mel Brooks' most polarizing work. And that's saying something, since all of his films essentially fall into the love it or hate it category. He's certainly not a man for all tastes, but most people who love his work love most of his films. This is the one that even fans of his comedy argue about. I personally am in favor of The Picture. Sure, it's not in the same category as Blazing Saddles or Young Frankenstein, or even Spaceballs for that matter, but it is better than Silent Movie and High Anxiety, in my opinion. But it's really unfair to compare when all that matters is if this particular film works, and I think it does. Comedies are at once hard and easy to critique. Hard because they don't really have a structure with which to judge by, plot, character development, all the stuff that usually goes into knowing how good a film is. Comedies don't play by those same rules, but they're also easy because it really comes down to, did I laugh or not? And God help me, History of the World made me laugh a lot. In fact, though it's wall-to-wall with juvenile humor, I think I laughed more watching it the other day than I did when I originally saw it at the age of 10. Now, I will concede that this is Brooks' most disjointed and scatological film, and it is also undeniably episodic, though that seems to be intentional, as it is pretty much structured that way. The film opens with The Dawn of Man and a parody of 2001, and then progresses through to the French Revolution. The bulk of the movie, or at least the longest sequence, focuses on the Roman Empire and features Brooks and Gregory Hines as slaves trying to escape their death sentence. This is also the least funny sequence, probably because it goes on longer and the jokes seem to drag on. But it does also contain some of the film's funniest moments, so you can see how the film is divisive. It also contains one of the catchiest songs since Springtime for Hitler. If you haven't seen this film, I recommend it if you're a fan of Brooks. However, if you're unfamiliar with him, this isn't the place to start. I would recommend watching Spaceballs first. If you enjoy that, then you'll love Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein. And only then, we'd be ready to give World a try and join the rest of us in either loving it or hating it. And once again, I give that 4 out of 5 stars. Now we're moving on to the real popular films here. This is probably one of the most popular films of all time. Certainly one of my favorites. Raiders of the Lost Ark, rated PG, which I award 5 out of 5 stars. I have to start with talking about this film. I have to start by saying the Raiders of the Lost Ark holds a special place personally in my life. Though probably not the first I actually saw. This is the first live action movie I can remember seeing. It also holds another milestone in my childhood as being my most viewed. In fact, I can't remember another movie I enjoyed more, except maybe Return of the Jedi. At this point, I've probably seen Raiders realistically about 30 times front to back. Probably a dozen more catching it in progress on cable, and it definitely never gets old. Every viewing of the film is just as fun, entertaining, and exciting. Now that's an easy catchphrase to throw around, but with this film I say that with absolutely no sense of irony or hyperbole. Of course, after saying all that, I have to admit that my next comment may come with a little bias, but that doesn't make it any less true. This is the kind of film that brings out the kid in all of us. I don't care how old you are. When you watch Indiana Jones don his hat and whip, you can't help but feel childish glee. This film is absolutely perfect. It's the quintessential action-adventure film. Francois Truffaut once said that a great movie contains 3 great scenes and no bad ones. Raiders has no bad scenes and at least 5 great ones. Every scene is almost better than the previous one. There isn't a wasted moment, and the film moves seamlessly from one breathtaking sequence to the next. Every element just works. There's, of course, action, but also romance, comedy, and fantasy. But the great thing is it doesn't dwell on any of it, instead flowing naturally. I mean, they all zoom along at a breakneck pace. Most action films, especially these days, would feel obligated to fill in all details. For example, the romantic relationship between Indiana Jones and an old flame is quickly explained, and then the rest is left up to the characters. They simply spend the rest of the film caught up in the action. There's no time for sex, arguing, or even much dialogue. And in my opinion, that makes the relationship all the more interesting and exciting. The humor is treated the same way, delivered matter-of-factly in the moment, and then moves on. I was actually about to discuss how the film's opening action sequence is so perfect, but there are actually about 7 such sequences in this film. And I suppose that makes sense, given that this is one of the best, most beloved adventure films ever made. Director Steven Spielberg solidified his place in the movie Hall of Fame with this film, which is saying something since he had already made Jaws and Close Encounters. Even to this day, Raiders of the Lost Ark is his crowning achievement. I'm sure he's made better and more important films, even more lovable ones, but none as perfectly constructed and thoroughly entertaining as this one. I mean, this is just a classic. This is the movie that, this is my childhood. This movie, when I think of the movie, if I had to pick one movie that most beloved from my childhood, most remembered, it's Raiders of the Lost Ark. And of course, if I chose more, Steven Spielberg is the director who directed my childhood, who is most responsible. Whether directing or producing films. And if I had to pick my 10 favorites, he's probably half, if not 75% of those movies. So, and watching it, Raiders it never changes. Raiders is one of those films that just holds up, and it holds up after every viewing, whether you've seen it once, twice, a million times. Like it's still just as entertaining and exciting, and you can't help but getting wrapped up in it. So of course I highly recommend it, and if anybody watching this has never seen it, I go turn this video off and go watch it now, because it's fantastic. And if you have seen it, maybe don't turn the video off, but I definitely go watch it again, because it's that great. Now we're moving on to our last film in this series set. And Act 1 here of 1981, and another great movie, Superman 2, which is rated PG, and also 5 out of 5 stars. Now, after dispensing with all the necessary character setups and origin story, from Kal-El's birth on Krypton to his eventual metamorphosis into Superman, to his first run-in with Lex Luthor in 1978 Superman the movie, Superman 2 is free to stand on its own, and therefore contains the first full and most substantial and intimate screen story about the Man of Steel. Now, I in no way mean that as an affront to the first film, which was a massive achievement and an undeniable hallmark in film history. It's just that by the time it finished filling in all the backstory, only about an hour of its nearly 2.5-hour running time was devoted to Superman. This time the filmmakers are able to tell a much more complex story and create a tighter, slicker, and even slightly more satisfying film. Not necessarily a better film, but certainly a stronger vision of Superman. With about half the footage already filmed simultaneously with the first one, Superman 2 is a nearly perfect continuation of the events in that film. After thwarting an attempted bombing in Paris, Superman hurls the bomb into space. Upon its explosion, the 3 villains who were encased in a glass prison by Kal-El's father in the film's opening sequence are suddenly released. They immediately head to Earth, where they find themselves endowed with all the same powers as Superman. Led by General Zod in a fantastic, menacing performance by Terrence Stamp, they proceed to wreak havoc on the good people of Metropolis. Seizing upon a glorious opportunity to exact his revenge and finally see Superman defeated, master criminal Lex Luthor, once again played by the wonderful Gene Hackman, having already escaped from prison and discovered Superman's secret fortress, he teams up with the Krypton criminals. Now, if that weren't enough to keep Superman's hands full, Lois, played once again by Margot Kidder, has become convinced that Clark Kent is Superman and is determined to prove it, even if that means repeatedly placing herself in danger. Now, I almost left out the best part. There's actually a romance that blossoms between Superman and Lois. leading him to consider giving up his powers in order to settle down to an ordinary life with her. This not only leads to great conflict in the plot, but provides the picture with real humanity and heart, not to mention some very inspired comedic moments. As you can assess from that breathy description, there's never a dull moment in this picture. In fact, it has enough plot lines to fill at least 3 pictures. But that's what makes it far superior to the traditional sequel, which generally lack enough brains and ideas for a single picture. The only problem is that since there are so many things going on, inevitably, when they all come to a head in the conclusion, there isn't enough time to wrap them all up satisfyingly. I especially felt the villain's showdown with Superman seemed rushed, and Lex Luthor's involvement seemed almost perfunctory. He's a very sideline character here, which is sad because Gene Hackman gives such a great performance and was such a good element in the first film. I would have liked to seen his villain really given more. But when you've got a villain like General Zod, what can you do but sideline Lex Luthor, especially as played by Terrence Stamp. So. But these are all really minor details, in the overall scope of the picture. And after all, it's really the romance and the complications that arise from it that really provide the film with its greatest conflict and the most enjoyment. With Superman the movie, the filmmakers proved that Superman could fly, could convincingly fly into action on the big screen. What Superman 2 manages to pull off is something even more challenging, bringing him back down to earth. Here, Superman is more than just a comic book character. He's a flesh and blood hero with heart. Superman 2, and Superman the movies for that matter, is a timeless movie experience that hasn't really changed over the years. Sure, the special effects seem a little dated, which is to be expected, but the action sequences and multiple plots still more than hold up. For evidence, I actually watched the movie with my 5 and 7-year-old boys the other day, and they were just as enthralled, if not more, than if they were watching a modern Marvel epic. Which, by the way, likely wouldn't even exist if not for this groundbreaking action-adventure classic. So, once again, this is a movie that hasn't really changed over the years. I've returned to it a few times, not nearly as much as Raiders, but this is one of those, I enjoy this more than the Superman the movie. Again, I'm not saying it's a better film. That's an argument for someone else at another time. I think both films are great. This is just the one, if I had to choose between the two to watch, this is the one that I return to the most. And the most entertaining and the most fun. It's definitely to me the best Superman movie, just because, as I said, it contains the best fully developed Superman story. So once again, 5 out of 5 stars. So, but yeah, so this is kind of this is what this is going to be like. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did returning to these movies and discussing them. I've got more coming up, some more from 1981, 7 more movies, to be exact, from 1981, and then, I'll be doing this, as I said, moving on to 1982, so, I can't think off the top of my head the movies from 1981. I think we got Conan. No, was that 1982? I'm not sure. They're kind of all blending together in my brain right now, but there are some more coming up. So I will be making another one of these videos sometime soon. So if you enjoyed this, please join me. As I said, this has been a lot of fun. I hope you are inspired to if you haven't seen these movies, I hope you're inspired to go check them out. And if you have seen them, I hope this makes you want to go see them again, and brings up some of your own memories and past experiences at the movies, which is what this is all about. So thank you for joining me, and we'll see you next time on Take 2